Hey, welcome to part 2 of the series. So what we're going to learn about are transform tools, how parts of a mesh can interact with another part of a mesh, and how we can become a little bit more precise overall. This is going to be a really huge tool demonstration. We're not going to do actual modeling here, but we're going to learn about the tools that will help us with more modeling options. So if not ready, get ready. Look to the bottom left of your 3D viewport. You're going to see Object Mode. Click that and go to Edit Mode. Now, look to the right of it. You're going to see these three boxes. One of them's for vertices, one of them's for edges, and the other is for faces. Vertices are basically the atom of the model. Edges, faces, they're made up of vertices. Okay, so with Edge Select, we see edges. They're made up of two vertices. Face Select helps us select faces. They're made up of 3 vertices or more. They also make up the surface of every model. Let's toggle X-ray mode. X-ray mode is indicated by the icon with these 2 squares overlapping each other, or you can press Alt-Z. So in X-ray mode, we can select things behind faces, but we can still select the faces themselves. So let's go into Edge Edit mode, and then select behind those faces. Pretty useful. Let's move things in an XYZ axis. I'm going to go to Vertex Select. Then, I'm going to select our Move tool. Remember, that's in the toolbar activated by T. This is the transform symbol, or you can just call it the transform. You can move each of these colored arrows to move things in one single axis. Or you can select the center of the vertex itself in the white circle, and then just move it around by itself. You can do the same as that just by pressing G. You can also select these squares, which move things in 2 axes, leaving out one of them. When you move a vertex, or anything for that matter, you can see in the bottom left the distance of how far you moved it from its original location. They all say the distances based on the XYZ axis. Alright, let's click on this vertex, keep it where it is, and let go immediately. You'll see in the bottom left that it says Move. Let's open it up because that's actually a menu. Alright, so with these values, we can move things based on one axis. So let's move this by 2 on the y-axis. So after we hit enter, it's moved to where we want it to. Remember, we can see what axis is which just by looking at the top right here. Let's go to quad camera view. We can go there by going Control, Alt, Q together. Quad view adds 3 cameras in an orthographic fashion, giving a flat perspective on multiple sides. Moving a vertex in one camera is going to make it move in 2 axes, leaving out one of them. The front orthographic camera is going to leave out movement on the y-axis, as you can see here in the bottom left. The coordinates are changing for everything but the y-axis. So the right orthographic camera leaves out the x-axis, and the top orthographic camera leaves out the z-axis. You can still view things normally using the user perspective camera. To exit this mode, hit Ctrl Alt Q again. Quad camera view is also a good place to add reference images. To do that, let's go to Object Mode. Now in your File Explorer, make sure you have your image selected and just drag it into Blender. There are ways that we can modify how we view our reference image. Let's go all the way to the right and head to Object Data Properties. It's only going to appear if you have your reference image selected. Alright, so let's check out our options. You can enable Use Alpha to add some transparency. That's going to enable the opacity value slider. You can force your reference to be in the front or the back. Same thing with the sides here. You could have it seen on the front or the back, or both of them. If you want to go into a flat perspective view without pressing Ctrl Alt Q, all you have to do is hold on to your Alt key and click and move your middle mouse button together. And then press the keypad 5. You can do this on all sides. Let's practice snapping. Select an axis to move with. Now hold Ctrl and drag. Right now we're dragging in 1 meter, because we set our unit measurements to metric. To move in centimeters, hold Shift while moving with Control. Now we're moving in centimeters. In the header, look for a magnet icon. Activate it. This is going to inverse our ability to snap. If we move our axis now, we're going to be snapping by default. If we hold Shift, we're going to be moving in centimeters while moving it. We don't have to hold Control anymore to snap. If we do hold Control, we're not going to be snapping anymore. I'm going to turn this off. We don't just have to snap with increments. There are different ways of snapping, such as vertex snapping, edge snapping, face snapping, volume snap, edge center snap, and edge perpendicular snap. I'll be going through all of these. In vertex snap, you can drag a vertex and align it with another vertex, or any object really. Make sure you move your mouse to the vertex while you're snapping. So with this tool, I'm going to turn this cube back into a cube. With edge snapping, what we're going to do is that we can move our selection and follow it along an edge. So take notice with how I'm selecting my vertex, dragging it, and then moving it along an edge with my mouse. Being able to know where you're snapping is a good idea. Alright, let's try out face snapping. I'm going to hit G for a better example of this. Remember that G makes us move our object or selection using our mouse. Right now I'm going to hold Control to go into snapping mode. And now our selection has placed itself on a face. So we can snap to an edge center, just as it says here. With edge perpendicular snapping, what we can do is that we can move our selected object through a sloped edge. I'm going to align this vertex to match up with the sloped edge here. So as you can see here, the vertex has almost aligned itself perfectly. Let's give it a few more tries. There we go. So what about volume snapping? Volume snapping pretty much works like faces, but it's going to balance out an entire different object's physical volume by closing them in on each other. I wouldn't really want to use this in edit mode. It's much better balanced out by objects. Notice how these cubes are almost equaling themselves by their centers. That's pretty much what volume snapping does. Alright, so let's practice some rotation. I'm going to hit A to select all the vertices on a cube. Now we're going to press R to rotate. Watch it go spin! Left click to confirm or right click to cancel. I'm going to cancel. Hey, do you remember back when I was talking about the X, Y, and Z axis? Let's rotate on a single axis. Hit R and then X. That's going to lock our rotation to the X axis. You can hit R and Y for the Y axis, and hit R and Z for the Z axis. Do remember that you can still do incremental snapping in this mode with Control. You can also see how many degrees you rotated at the bottom left. You can also double tap R to do a trackball rotation. Let's practice resizing, or what we call it, scaling. With the cube still selected, hit S alone to scale on all axes at once. Hit S with X, Y, or Z to scale on that single axis. You can still do incremental snapping with this by pressing Control. In the bottom left, you can see how much you scaled with the value of a percentage. We could say that 1 is 100%, and something like 1.1 is 110%. Let's practice X, Y, and Z locking. Go to face selection mode. Select a face, for example. Now press S and then Shift Y. You'll see now that the Y axis is locked and you won't be able to drag with it. So pressing Shift, X, Y, and Z during transforming something will lock that one axis. This is useful for stretching in two axes without needing to stretch for a third time. Hey, let's try something simple. Let's duplicate something. So let's select something like this face and Shift D to duplicate it. Of course, we can do the same in object mode, as I could show you here. With this object selected, hit Shift D again. Dragging it out, we have our duplicated object with our duplicated face. Moving, rotating, and scaling all behave under the rules of where the transform is. We can change the behavior of these transform pivot points when we select objects or things in edit mode. Let's test it out with the vertex. Remember the snap icon? Go to the left of it, to these two interlinked spheres. Click on it and you'll see that this is the transform pivot point menu. By default, it's on median point, so if we select two vertices for example, it'll go to the median point of these two selected vertices. If we choose active element, it will go to our most recently selected object, or item, or anything. With individual origins, you'll find it useful if you want to rescale a lot of things. So what it does is that it lets you scale from each individual center point from each individual object, or mesh. It doesn't just have to be for scaling, it can be for rotating as well, or moving things around, or some other functions. Alright, so I'm going to duplicate this cube. Now, to see the effects of the transform pivot function, select both of our cubes. Now scale them. With individual origins, things are going to scale with their own centers, based on their geometry. It's different from median point, because median point scales from the center of all of our selections. 3D cursor scales from our 3D cursor, which we'll get to in a bit. Bounding box center might work a bit like median point, but it's a little closer to what we might expect. But let's try something out. I'm going to subdivide our left cube. Bonus points, it's with Control R. Put down the letter R in the comments if you caught that. Okay, so let's scale in bounding box center. So once we start scaling, it might seem like, wow, it's just like median point. But if we actually do go to median point, what we're going to see is that the transform pivot is leaning towards the area that has more vertices on it. Let's check out our transform orientations. You see the menu by what it says here, Global. It's right next to the transform pivot point options, which are the two circles. Let's click on Global. Alright, so what does Global mean? So Global follows the XYZ transforms of the world. No matter how weird you rotate your object, the transform is still going to stay on the same orientation. This is going to be different in local mode. When we change the local orientation, not much is going to change until we rotate our cube. So what it's doing is that it's taking the orientation of the object origin and then following the axis on that. For normal transform orientation, I'm going to have to modify the mesh to show you how it works. You're going to see that normal orientation is going to be very useful for sloped objects or things with a lot of curves. I'm going to select both faces, go to normal, and what you'll see is that the normal mode orients the transform in the slope of the face. If you select multiple faces with different angles, what the normal transform is going to do is that it's going to measure in between the degrees of the different angles. As for gimbal mode, we don't have to worry about that. It's more of an animation thing. View. View bases our transform forward, and it's going to follow it wherever we're looking. Setting it to cursor follows the orientation of our 3D cursor. The 3D cursor pretty much faces where we're going to look at, but if we rotate our camera around, it's still going to stay there. So let's split some objects. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to select this cube. So now I'm going to press P. What we could do is that we could separate by selection, separate by material, which lets us separate faces based on what material they're assigned to. Or we could separate by loose parts, where faces, vertices, or edges that aren't connected to anything get split off. I'm going to separate by selection. Let's go to object mode. Now we can see that they're two separate objects. If we want to merge something back together, select all the meshes and only meshes and hit Ctrl J. Now all the objects are just one. So here's a cube that's away from its object origin. Okay, so let's scale this cube. We're going to find out that it's not scaling from its center. So if we want to fix something like this, all we have to do is set our origins to the center of that cube. Make sure you have what you want selected in object mode. Hit W. Move your mouse over to set origin, and then click origin to geometry. So what exactly did this do? This just moved our object origin to the center of our cube. You can see it with this orange dot here. So an object's origin point is the 0, 0, 0 coordinate, or the absolute 0 coordinate of an object in edit mode. If we add modifiers to this mesh, what we're going to see is that the absolute 0 coordinates will be the center point of all generated math by that modifier. This doesn't mean that it's the absolute 0 in the world coordinates though. We can see that it's obviously not centered. So let's head into the sidebar to confirm that. Do also note that you can do this with multiple objects selected. If we were making an individual object, what we'd want is for the object origin of that object to be in the center of the world. Same thing with the mesh. This makes a good presentable model, especially if you need to rotate around it. Say that we want to copy and paste objects to reposition them in the world. If we do that, the world origin isn't going to be the same for each object. That's okay, but we have to make sure that the object origin for each of those objects is centered. There are some exceptions to this rule. Say that if you want your object just floating out to the side on purpose. Let's assign the object origin to the center of the world by hitting Ctrl A in object mode and applying the location. If we hit S now and scale upwards, we're going to see that we're in the same position as we were before. However, if you want to move your object into the center of the world, or move it to the object origin, all you have to do is hit W, set origin, and set geometry to origin. And now it's all centered. Yay! So let's change our object origin and base it on another object. We're going to do that by using our 3D cursor. Our 3D cursor is the red and white circle. I'm going to demonstrate this by spawning a cone and then just dragging it out there. With the cone selected, I'm going to hold on to Shift S. Then I'm going to drag my mouse to cursor to selected. Now our 3D cursor is at our selected object's origin point. I'm going to select the old cube, hit W, set origin, and set origin to 3D cursor. And now our 3D cursor is the reference point of where our object's origin should be. And since our 3D cursor is at another object's origin point, we've now linked two object origin points into the same coordinates. What the heck kind of shape is this? Hey guys, Rookston with a Better Mic speaking. Next up, we're going to learn about a bunch of more hotkeys based on how we're going to debug our mesh and prepare our model for a modeling process. So stick around.